and welcome back to the Airport Wild podcast. On today's episode, we go way in depth on trail cameras with Janet Pesaturo. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about everything from what a trail camera is, different parts of a trail camera setup, to some tips and tricks for you guys and how to set up in order to get those best shots for your airports, or just if you want to run trail cameras as a personal endeavor. So sit back, relax. Please don't forget to hit that like, share, or subscribe button, and enjoy the show. Yeah, so thank you, Janet, for coming on today.
My pleasure.
Yeah, really looking forward to what we're going to talk about here. Today's topic is trail cameras, and uh, you're going to be our expert.
Okay. All right.
So let's just jump right into it. It's the intro, so I might as well start with an intro. Maybe Janet, give us some background about yourself and maybe like how long you've been running trail cameras and.
Okay, sure. So I think I started using trail cameras probably around 2005-ish, a little after I started getting into wildlife tracking as a hobby. My old field, my original field was actually psychiatry, and I was a practicing psychiatrist for about 10 years and then left that to bring up with my kids. And then these are the things I took on as hobbies that then became obsessions. At first I was using trail cameras just very casually. It was just a way to actually observe what I could only imagine by tracking wildlife. I got to see the behaviors I could only kind of infer from what I saw out in the field. So I thought that was really cool. And then gradually it became an obsession. And now I teach wildlife tracking and camera trapping, and I write about it, I blog about it. And it's just sort of a hobby. I'm sort of self-employed, kind of semi-retired. And in 2010, I went back to school late in life to get a master's in conservation biology, which really kind of took both tracking and camera trapping to a new level for me, my teaching and writing about it. So that's where I am. um, I published a book in 2018 on camera trapping the wildlife of the eastern U.S. And currently I'm working on one for the West, but that's sort of on hold a bit now because of the pandemic, and it requires a lot of travel. I live in the Northeast and I need to be traveling out West, which I can't do right now. So.
Right. Oh, and was it called Wildlife of the East, or what's the title of your book?
Camera Trapping Guide: Tracks, Sign, and Behavior of Eastern Wildlife.
Very nice. Uh, and then is when you're doing all this, is there? I mean, I'm assuming you're kind of a generalist with what kind of wildlife you're looking for. Or do you have like kind of like a pet species? You know, you try to find more
Um,
than others.
yeah, I am more of a generalist, although I'm very specific in terms of I want to. So since I've decided to write these books about it, I need to learn how to camera trap each species and all their different behaviors. So I might focus on one species and try to get it scent marking and hunting or foraging or whatever, depending on the kind of animal it is, and just try to capture all its behaviors so I can explain to people how to go about doing that. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's something you don't like in my usage of trail cameras. Is something I don't ever think about. Is so you're actually using these trail cameras to looking for a specific behavior, not just looking for the
Often
animal
I do that.
itself.
Often I do that. Sometimes I do look for general hotspots if I just want, a place where there's a lot of wildlife, a lot of different wildlife. Those make for entertaining videos. It's always interesting to see, maybe some interspecies behavior if you have a hotspot like that. But often I'm focusing on a specific species and looking for a behavior, like a bear at a marking tree. Bears have these trees, special trees from the bear's perspective, where they go rub themselves, they bite and they claw at it, and they go repeatedly to the same trees, and multiple individuals go to that, the same tree. So if you find a tree like that, you can target that with your camera and get really interesting bear behavior. So that's very specific, as opposed to, like a trail junction or something, where you get a lot of different wildlife walking by.
Right, and that's kind of what I'm more used to is trying to find these intersections and especially where intersections and edges. Trying to get that as just kind of seeing what's out there more than anything
Right.
else.
I imagine for somebody doing airport wildlife, you just want to detect presence of the species. So you're looking for those general hotspots. Yeah.
Right, and then so we probably have to bring this right back to the airport stuff.
Yeah.
So let's dive right into the cameras themselves.
Okay.
Like I just kind of want maybe go over some basics of like what do you look for? Like say, all right, so you're in the market gonna buy a brand new camera.
Yeah.
Maybe something basic, something you don't mind if it gets bumped or beaten or whatever. What do you look for to like what separates a good camera from call it a junker?
Well, first of all, the cheap ones now are getting better and better. They're, every year the cheap models are better. So I don't know if there's a real division between junkies and good ones. Uh, let's see where to start. So I guess I would recommend for somebody just starting with a trail camera to go with a cheap one. And if it works for you, if you like it and you're going to keep using them, then you might want to upgrade it. And if you decide not to use them, you won't have wasted so much money. Just beware that a lot of these cheap cameras, though, you'll go on Amazon and it'll be a $50 camera and it'll have, 3,000 reviews where most of them are 5-star. Those are mostly fake. These are these are the companies of these cheap Chinese cameras aggressively get people to write them good reviews. They in exchange for free merchandise. So that's going to be different from what it looks like. It's an amazing camera. It's only $50 and it has all these wonderful 5-star reviews. And compare it to a well-known brand like Browning or Reconyx, which will have much worse reviews because they're people who are experienced and really critically reviewing them, but they're actually much better cameras. So Amazon is really not a good place to believe what you see for those.
I can testify to that. I've actually purchased those really cheap cameras and got
Yeah.
little cards in there saying, if you leave us a review, we'll and take a picture of it, send it to this email address, we'll send you something free.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I've tested out a lot of those cheaper end ones, and there's some that work pretty good, and then some of them, that I've had bad experiences with as well. So
Yeah, so the specs might be good. It might look like the trigger speed is good and all that, and the image quality might look okay when you look at the sample photos, but a lot of them break after a few months. So you kind of get what you paid for. I would say, I guess, Some people have gotten those cheap ones and said they worked for a year or more, but I would say that quality control is poor for those. And, sort of the rate of getting a quote lemon is very high with those cameras. Whereas if you go with a name brand, you're more likely to get one that will last you for years. So, yeah.
So, speaking of specs, I'm sorry, Jesse, if you already had this question lined up, but what specific spec should someone be looking at? What's a good spec versus a bad spec as far as trigger speed,
Yep.
pixels, and per se?
Okay, well, let's start with trigger speed. The trigger speed, or it's really more accurately called a trigger delay, and that's the time between the moment the camera detects an animal and the moment it takes a picture. Okay, just for people who aren't familiar with these. There's a little bit of a delay there. In this day and age, most of the cameras have a trigger delay or trigger speed of less than a second, and that's very good. Less than a half a second is excellent. And then there's the delay between, it's called the recovery speed. It's a delay between triggers. So the camera takes a photo or a video and then it needs some time to recover before it can take another one. So even if the animal's still there, it might not trigger immediately. And something less than 2 seconds or for video, less than 2 seconds for video and less than a second for photos is good. Generally, the video trigger speed and recovery speed are slightly slower than photo trigger speed and recovery speed.
Right, much larger file sizes it's trying to store away. And do you notice a difference between even with your different SD cards? Does that help your recovery speed at all if you run like a better card in a camera?
I don't know. I only use SanDisk. I don't think that's, as long as you use a respectable one, I don't think that affects it very much. Some of the companies, though, what they report for their recovery speed is not exactly honest. They don't count the time it takes the camera to write to the card. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they might say the recovery speed's only a second, but it's actually 5 seconds, because I've tested some of those. So a really good place to look for that, these comparisons of trigger and recovery speed and other specs, is a site called trailcampro.com. They have very detailed reviews of many different camera models, not all of them, but a lot of them. And they really break it down. They really do very thorough tests and reviews, and you can compare one to another. So that's a great site to know about. So that's trigger and recovery speed. You also, of course, want to look at image quality, both photo and video quality. And the best way to do that is just look at examples. TrailCam Pro also has examples for many of the cameras that they review, of the photos and the videos that they take. Video quality and photo quality can be very different for the same camera. So you want to look at what you're most interested in. If you're going to be taking videos, look at the video quality. And then you also, if you're interested in video, audio might be important for you, depending on what you're doing with the camera. So you want to, listen to samples of that. How good is the audio? It used to be most of the models in the past had very, very poor audio, but some of them are getting really good right now. Again, I mentioned Browning. They have a really, really good audio. Just for kind of a general, all-round, middle-of-the-road camera, I love the Browning Recon Force and the Browning Spec Ops, and they run around $200 or a little bit less. They tend to last. I've had very few problems with them, and they're very fast cameras. The image quality is excellent. The two I mentioned have different flash types, and we can talk about that as another thing to look at when you're looking for a camera. So, do you want to move into flash type? Or?
Yeah, we're already there.
Okay. All right. So, two main types are IR flashes, infrared flashes, versus white flashes. And within infrared, there are two main types of those. There's a so-called no-glow infrared flash, which is basically all infrared light. The flash is only infrared light, and if you remember from high school physics, infrared light is not visible. It's not in the visible range. range. So people and animals generally cannot see it. So that's an advantage for animals that are easily spooked, like coyotes, for example. They tend to be very wary. And also for potential human thieves, they can't see the camera at night. So an IR flash, I should say, gives you only black and white images, and they tend to be grainy. So that's the trade-off. It's great because nobody can see it, neither animals nor people, but it's the negative is that the photos aren't very good, the night photos. Of course, your day photos will still be in color. And then there's a so-called low glow or red glow infrared flash, and that has a little bit of red light in it. So that's visible. You can see a little bit of red light. Depending on the camera, you might be able to see a lot of red light. And the advantage to that is you get it's still black and white, the nighttime images, but you get much better quality. They're much sharper. So it depends on how, and animals notice them, and it depends on the species and also the individual animal and the environment you're in, whether they're going to care about that. I imagine animals around the airport are probably used to all kinds of lights and noises, so it's possible that they're, any species would just ignore, not care about the flashes there. And then there are very few most people like the infrared flashes, but there are a few models with white flashes. And obviously they take color photos at night because it's a regular visible white flash. But there are two types of those too. There's an LED white flash and a xenon white flash. The LED flash can be on continuously, which means that you can get color videos with an LED white flash. A xenon white flash is just a sudden flash and then it turns off. So it only takes color photos at night. It cannot take color videos. So such a camera maybe doesn't, with a trail camera with a xenon white flash might not be able to take video at all, or maybe it'll switch to an IR flash at nighttime and give you for the videos and give you black and white videos, but color photos. So those are the flash options.
And would it be more common to find maybe like the xenons and like more like the lower end cameras versus
yeah, it's hard to generalize because there are so few. I mean, there are so few white flash cameras available. But as you mentioned it, I think that the only cheapy white flash camera I know of is a xenon. I have a white flash Reconyx, which is an expensive camera that does take nighttime video. It has the LED flash, but there just aren't that many white flash. Just because I think they're mostly trail cameras, as you know, were mostly used for hunting, and what was important to hunters was to keep the camera kind of unnoticed by animals. But people now are using them for all different reasons, including researchers who want very detailed night pictures so they can look at like markings on the animals and distinguish between individuals and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember I used to work on a project in New York where we were doing fisher research. We were using roundings and reconyxes to get trail camera presence absence mostly of fisher in the Adirondack Mountains. Remember there was a lot of talk about using the same cameras for pine marten research. Wow. But they were using better cameras for the pine martens because you can tell individuals by the white blaze on the chest.
Yeah, the throat, the markings on the throat. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's definitely. So I mean, it's not just going out. Just kind of summarize what we got so far. Is you pretty much there's differences out there. Right. So, if somebody just wants to grab a camera, that's fine, well, but you can really customize these for what your goal is in a way.
Yeah, there are a lot of different things. You also might want to, particularly for airport biology, you might want to consider the detection range of the camera. So that's not important to me, but it might be important to you. So some cameras might have a detection range that only goes out to 50 feet, meaning that it will trigger for an animal that's 50 feet away, up to 50 feet away. Another one might trigger for an animal that's up to 100 feet away. And if you're looking for presence absence data, you probably want to get as much data as you can. Whereas if you're like me, I don't really care. I don't want it to trigger unless it's going to be a good photo. So if something's 100 feet away, I'd rather have it not take a picture.
Right, because that's going to give you those false images too. If you get,
Right.
I'm kind of thinking like if you get you're running those 100-footer,
Yeah.
but you're in very tight cover. You're not going to be able to clear up. If you get any wind or anything, you're going to get all these
Yes,
shots just taken off.
yeah, right. So we can talk about when we get to that, we can talk about how to deal with that too. Yeah, that's true. And what are the other things? Oh, and just a couple of other things on choosing a camera. The user interface is important to some people who aren't really technically inclined. Some of them have very clunky, awkward user interfaces, and other ones have nice, intuitive user interfaces. And of course, you can't know that really except by talking to people and asking them, what it's like to program it, reading reviews and that kind of stuff. But it does make a difference. A really difficult to use camera might mean that a person just leaves it on the shelf after the first time.
Right, get frustrated.
Yeah, some of them can be very frustrating and inscrutable. And the instruction manual sounds like it's been translated to 7 different languages before they got to English. So it's kind of nice to have one that's just intuitive that you can just figure out.
Right, and I don't want to push a particular brand, but I will say that that Fisher, I'm just reference that Fisher project I was on. We used Brownings. They were the older Brownings. I think at the time they're going for like $120, so they're one of the lower ends. This is 5-6 years ago, and prices have gone down since then.
Yeah.
But even then, it was only a $120 camera. I can't remember what the model was though off the top of my head, but it had a little screen on the front.
Yeah.
So you could. And for us, we were putting bait on a tree and trying to line these, had to line up the shot just right. Yeah. And with the Brownings, man, we could line them up and you'd be in and out of a spot in 10 minutes. That's baited and gone.
Right.
We ran Reconics. Yeah, we ran Reconics at the same time, so we had a mixed bag of Brownings and Reconics. Reconics, you had to go in there, take a test shot, take it out, put it in a camera, look at it, or like a photo camera. Put it a point and click, and it was just you were in the same spot for half an hour sometimes trying to get the right shot lined up.
Yeah, the older Reconics, I think I have one of those that you're talking about. It's a very clunky camera. I hate it, but it's an old camera. It's outdated, but the newer ones are much better. I love my Reconics Ultrafire, which is really, really a dream to use. It's very easy to use. It also has a viewing screen, but a viewing screen is a really good thing. A really good point in terms of choosing a camera. Not all of them have a viewing screen. Where you can actually see the images and when you go and pick up your camera. So at this point, I wouldn't even buy a camera that doesn't have a viewing screen because it's so convenient to be able to quickly go through and see the photos when you pick up your camera. So that's a really cool thing to have too. Another really simple thing that nobody thinks of this when they go buy a camera. And if you're ordering it online, you won't even be able to see whether it has this or not. If you're going to want to secure your camera with a lock, like with a cable lock, you need to make sure there are holes that in the back of the camera to thread the lock through. I noticed that a lot of the cheap ones, like the $50 cameras, don't have that. So you can't lock it if you want to. And if you're going to need a security box for it, that's a metal box that encases the camera it helps prevent theft or damage by animals. They don't make security boxes for every model, particularly the real cheap ones. You can't get one for it. So you want to make sure that there's one made for the model you get if that's important to you.
Right, and that's something that, like in states where, because I've always heard that was referred to as bear boxes.
Yeah, right.
So I mean, if you're in an area that's heavy on bear, even if you're not expecting to be getting shots of bear, it's probably a good idea to pick up a security box or a bear box.
Right, or people stealing them or vandalizing them. I've had them. People have been more of a problem for me than bears, but yeah, people sometimes will steal the SD card. They'll open up the camera and turn it off or something. They do all kinds of stuff. So yeah. I hardly ever use them now without a security box and a lock. So
yeah, because that's actually one thing I didn't think about before was how you're going to secure this thing to the tree.
Yeah.
So do you do like mostly a security box, or do you do security box with a cable lock, or like what's your go-to for how to secure your camera? So
I use a security box, and then I usually thread a cable through it and cable it to a tree or whatever, a fence post, whatever I'm cabling it to, sometimes a rock. You can, with a security box, you can screw the back of the box in. The box is a two-piece thing, and you can screw the back piece into the tree, and then put the camera in, put the front on, and then you can put the padlock through another hole in the front. So you don't need a cable lock. You can use a cable lock in that situation for extra security, but a padlock is enough if you screw the back of the box. Because once you screw the back of the box in, you close up the box, and you put the padlock in, nobody can open that box without breaking the padlock. So either way or both. Yeah.
Right. So that's another feature that, well, you brought up that some of the lower end cameras, the cheaper ones, might not have that.
Right.
And I was just thinking, I'm looking at one of my notes here. I was kind of wondering about any features that might automatically disqualify a camera from your selection choice. We talked about some of the features you do like. Like you're saying, like quicker than 1 second trigger speeds, or and one thing we haven't talked about is batteries yet.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But is there anything in a feature, like if you're going through and you're looking online, that as soon as something pops up, you're like, nope, man, on to the next one?
Yeah. Basically all the things I said. If the trigger speed is slower than a second, it's a no. If it doesn't have a viewing screen where I can view the photos and videos that it takes in the field, it's a no. If I can't get a security box for it, it's a no. So yeah, that's what it has to have. But most of them, if you're getting a name brand one, most of them have all those things.
Right, they're going to come with those extra features.
Yeah.
So one other feature that I wanted to talk about, though, is the batteries. Do you have a particular? Because I remember when I first started running cameras, a lot of them. My first one was an old film camera that was retro made into digital.
Yeah.
And it ran off of, I think it was 4 or 5 D batteries. I mean, the thing was
dinosaur age. Yeah.
Yeah. And every picture came out pink. It always had a pink hue to it for some reason.
Yeah. That's actually a specific problem. That's a stuck IR filter. That's a problem. A lot of cameras have that problem, and when you have that problem, the company will usually replace it, because that's not supposed to be like that.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I didn't know any better, and I just that was my. I throw that off to the side someplace, and try to get photos of just deer someplace with that one. But with the batteries though, have you noticed? Do you have a preference on?
Yes.
No. Yeah. So what do you look for?
Yeah. So for your listeners, I'll just tell them the 3 types that you can use. You can use regular alkaline batteries, you can use lithium batteries, or you can use nickel metal hydride rechargeable batteries. Rechargeable batteries sound wonderful because they're better environmentally, and they're cheaper in the long run because you can keep recharging them, obviously. The couple problems though. One is not all trail cameras are compatible with rechargeables. So if you want to use them, that's yet another thing to look for before you buy the camera. Can you use rechargeables with it? And the other thing is, if you're in a really cold climate, rechargeable batteries tend to drain quickly in a cold climate, so they're not a great choice for that. Or if you're going to be leaving your camera for a very long time, like months, like I do, sometimes even a year before you check it, you're going to want longer lasting batteries. Rechargeable batteries generally don't last long enough for that. That also, how long the batteries last depends on how busy the spot is too. The more activity there is going on, the more pictures it's taken, the more photos it's taken, the more often it's using the flash, the faster the batteries are going to drain out. So all those things you have to take into consideration. And for me, the lithium batteries are the best because I want something that's going to last a long time, no matter how busy the camera is. So I want to be able to come back in 6 months and have it not be dead or just have died. So lithium, they sort of they start out at a higher charge. They drain more slowly, and they don't drain quickly in cold weather like other batteries do. So
which is half the nation pretty much is going to be dealing with that at some point of the.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, that's pretty much all I use.
Yeah. Yeah. What about do you have any preference on battery size? I mean, pretty much everybody's mostly running double A's, I'd imagine, right now.
Most of them take either 8 or 12 AA batteries. Yeah, all the ones I have, all the cameras I've ever had take AA's.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a few older personal cameras. I think they were Wild Games. They took C's, but I'm not even sure if they're even making those models anymore. I mean, I'm talking a few years ago now.
Yeah, Wild Games have been out for a little while, or been
yeah.
out for a
Yeah.
little.
Yeah. So I don't. see, I'm in Arizona. We got we do run trail cameras here, but like you mentioned, we have a big thieving problem if you're up in the mountains.
Yeah.
So I haven't been running. I've kind of been out of the game for a year or so. I got some ones for work, but so somebody's gone out. I'm just kind of as sum this all up. Somebody's gone out. They've picked out their camera. They've got good trigger speed. They've got
Yeah.
they got a good camera. They got a good setup. So now they can actually go out and place it.
Okay.
What do you look for in a general spot? You're not looking for a particular species or behavior.
Okay. Can
what
I
do you
back
look
up for a second? I just want to back up for a second because I think a huge frustration is that people take their new camera and they go right out in the field and they come back a month later and there's no pictures on it because there could be many things wrong. But what they really need to do before they put it out is make sure they understand how the settings work and make sure they have it set properly for what they want to do. Because, as I said, the user interface for some of these cameras isn't tremendously wonderful. So it's really easy to make a mistake. And it's even easy to make a mistake if the user interface is good and you're experienced. So you want to familiarize yourself with it really well in your house or out in your backyard before you leave it somewhere for a long time. Just wanted to make that point. So now do we want to?
Yeah. No, I think that's really got me. Just setting up in the backyard, getting shots of the dog or the kids or something. Just making sure you understand it when they're running past and.
Yeah.
It
works. You want to make sure it's working properly. So that
right.
Head out 6 months later, you pick up your camera.
And always remember to turn it on.
Always remember to turn it on. Yeah, a bunch of things to do before you walk away from it is remember to turn it on. You want to remember to format that SD card in the camera. I don't know if people generally know about that, but you formatting the card is the same as deleting. So you have to format it, i.e. delete, before you can use it in that camera. If it's been in any other device, so if it's been in your laptop and you've downloaded the pictures, after that you want to format it in the camera that you're going to use it in. So all the cameras will have an option to either delete or format. They mean the same thing. And do that before you turn the camera on and leave. So
right, because that camera is going to be opening and storing stuff in different files and folders and whatnot.
Right, you want the software on the card to be compatible with the camera. So, and that's what formatting it in the camera does. Yeah. Okay, so then what was your question?
Well, I actually I was thinking about something else. So why don't we talk about some of the other settings before we actually go out and place the camera, on a tree someplace. So when you're running, do you have any preference between, taking shots, like single shot burst, video? What do you prefer?
Right. So, well, what you prefer depends on how you're using it. And I've used the cameras for different things. So if you're interested in presence absence data, you just want to document whatever is there, right? And you don't care about you don't need a beautiful photo. You just need to be able to say that animal's there. Probably single shot is with the minimum trigger speed, with the minimum trigger delay, because you can set a delay for longer if you want.
Yeah.
But single shot with a minimum trigger speed is probably adequate and economical, right? If I want to get a beautiful picture of something, I'm going to put it on a multi-shot or a burst mode, where every time it detects an animal, it's going to go bing, 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 and take a whole bunch of photos of that animal, and maybe one will come out nice, maybe not. But that's a waste if you're just trying to document presence absence. Why would you fill up your card and waste your batteries on that?
Right.
But that's what I do. I put it on, I'll put it on a rapid fire for 9 or 10 shots and get a whole bunch to pick from, or use it on video. And even if you're interested more in still images, you can take frames from the video and use those as stills.
Yeah, just thinking of a screen grab kind of thing.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, I have a friend that uses trail cameras a lot, and he insists on everything being video now because of trigger speeds and what happens if you take, one animal comes in and it takes that picture, but there's some other more interesting animal right behind it. So, but the difficulty I found with once you switch over to the video is going through all those pictures. It
Yeah,
seems
so it's
like
going through all it. It also burns out the battery faster, fills up the card a lot more. I also actually use video almost entirely now, partly because I'm most interested in the behavior of the animal, but also because even if I do just want a really beautiful still photo, I have many more frames to pick from if I have it on video than if I'm just taking a shot. But if I wanted to save money and I just needed to document something, I'd probably just put it on single photo. I think it's very unlikely that you're going to miss an animal like that during the delay period. That's a very unlikely event. It's going to come and disappear during the recovery phase of the camera.
Right. And then one more thing we never actually talked about is what size? Do you have a preferable size of SD card that you like to use?
That's a good one to bring up too. So most of them, or at least the ones that I'm familiar with, will take will take up to a maximum of a 32 gigabyte or gigabyte, however you pronounce it.
Yep.
And I always use the maximum in there because I tend to leave my cameras for a long time. I tend to put them on video, so the cards do get filled up quickly. If you want something bigger than 32, then you need to look specifically when you buy the camera, can it take something bigger than that? The Brownings and Reconics actually do take bigger cards. They take at least 64s. I think they actually take 256s or something like that. But many of the other models only take up to a 32. So it's, again, it's how you're going to use the camera.
Right, because I remember we always ran a lot of 16s and 32s.
Yeah.
But they were getting checked every other week. Also.
Oh yeah, so that was overkill.
Yeah, for the most part. But we were running. I think it was 3-shot bursts on a 10-second delay.
Yeah.
So if we get hundreds of photos of the same fisher on bait if you stuck around long enough.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess now we've kind of gone back far enough. So let's go back to maybe locations. Like maybe not specific locations, but like maybe landscape features that you look for.
Okay, so yeah, so again, it depends on your goals. So if you're interested in presence absence, you want to document as many species as possible. And I'm assuming the people are mostly interested in something larger than a squirrel. You don't have to document all the squirrels. You want to get the larger animals.
Right.
Many of those animals use trails, whether they're animal trails or people trails or both, they use them. And so trails and trail junctions are very productive spots if you just want to document as many animals as possible. Interesting other ways to get a lot of activity is like at a log crossing over water, something that the animals can use as a bridge to cross over water. And you have to think about, it's not just any old log over the water. You want to think carefully about is this going to be a log that a lot of animals use? And so the way you think that through is, well, if this is the best and really the only way that an animal can easily cross the water, it's a good spot. So if it's a big, thick log and it's the only one there that's crossing the water, it's probably going to be very productive. But if it's a little skinny log, then only the smaller animals are going to use it. If there are 10 other logs crossing the water right near it, then you're only going to get a little bit of activity at one spot. So you really want to look for like the best way for animals to cross the water. And that's a big, thick log that's not near any other crossings. And
right. 'Cause I guess the phrase that comes to mind for me is the path of least resistance. They're going to go. To remember as a kid, Dad always when I was learning tracking as a kid, I was always told a fox hates to get his feet wet.
Yeah.
So that's just one that I've always grown up with, and it extrapolates into other animals too. But that's what I was taught first on tracking was a lot of foxes.
And the cats really like to use log crossings. Bears actually use log crossings quite a lot too.
Yeah.
Even coyotes will use them, but the cats really like log walking. Fishers. Yeah. So those are popular spots. A really, really popular spot may not be that relevant. It's not relevant for airport stuff, but a really productive spot for anybody who's just interested in seeing a lot of wildlife and learning a lot about wildlife is a beaver dam, and they're very easy to find and identify. So you don't have to know anything about tracking. You find a beaver dam and you target that with your camera, and many animals use those as crossing structures to cross the water. And other species that don't use those dams as bridges are attracted to them for other reasons. So, like otters and mink tend to do a lot around near beaver dams. They hunt for fish in the ponds right near the dam. A lot of times they haul out right near the dam for whatever reason. I'm not exactly sure, but they love to haul out around there. You'll find otter latrines, meaning collections of their scat right near the dam. So they'll actually loaf around on the shore right near the dam quite frequently. And then obviously the beaver itself is working on the dam. So you really can get a lot of activity. It's probably the most gratifying spot that's easy to find for a beginner to just get lots of wildlife.
And then one that you haven't mentioned yet that always comes to my mind too is edges.
Yeah, so edges like a edges between two different types of habitat, like a field and a forest, or wetland and a forest, or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of animals kind of travel along the edges.
Yeah, because I've noticed even deer will use even if you have two different types of trees, like a soft edge,
Yeah,
in a forest, where pines might meet up against maple, hardwood versus softwood. I've even seen them travel along those
yeah,
kinds of edges.
yeah. And it probably makes a lot of sense. When you put this out, you want to kind of think about the animal that you're most interested in and where they would go. So a deer is probably feeding more in the hardwood area,
Yeah.
but maybe likes to be near the softwoods because it's good cover there. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So that would be a good place for a deer to be walking. So
Right.
just try
Easy
to
escape.
yeah, think about the animal you're interested in. How are they going to use the landscape?
Um, you got anything you want to add in there, Cody?
No. I think we're on the right track. I guess some questions I might have coming up are we talked about initial camera setup or no cam- camera and if I'm going off track, just to hold off on these until you're ready for them. But um, you know, camera aiming and
Okay.
position.
Okay,
And,
do we
unless
want,
you jump ahead on that one.
okay, do we want to do that now, or should I we talked about general hotspots. Do we want to talk a little about specific hotspots, or do that later? Like if you're actually,
Yeah, no, let's do the specifics, and then we'll go into maybe
okay.
the camera positioning and aiming in a bit.
All right, so specifics, this is where if you're interested in a certain species or even to get even more specific than that, a certain behavior. This is where you kind of need to know something about the track. You need to know how to read the animal's tracks and scat and feeding sign and so forth, other kinds of signs that they leave in order to target something like this. You might need to know what its den looks like. So oh dear, sorry, a hummingbird just flew against my window. It's just weird, but
I heard that one.
he's okay. Um, so yeah, you want to be able to identify these different things so that you can find them, and it can be very productive depending on what your goal is to target an animal's den. And dens can be all different kinds of things. They can be holes in the ground. They can be rock caves or crevices. They can be the space under your shed. Whatever, all kinds of spaces the animals use. And you just need to know what kind of space your target animal uses. Or you might want to know how it forages, how it hunts, what it hunts for, what it forages for, and how to find those places where there's a high density of its food resources. You might want to know what its food caches look like. Food caches are wonderful places to put cameras because not just the animal that created that cache, but lots of other animals who want to steal it will also come to that spot. So that's sort of another hot spot too.
Can you maybe give a couple of examples of like who would make a cache and who might try
Yeah,
to make a cache?
this is one that people don't really think about that much, but a certain rodent, a red squirrel, makes very large food caches, and a lot of other animals steal them. If it's a cache of like, so red squirrels are thought of as mostly squirrels of coniferous forests where they store a lot of pine cones, but they're actually more generalist than that. In a lot of locations, they will store large quantities of nuts like acorns, hickory nuts, whatever. And those kind of caches are valuable to many species. Bears eat those, fishers will eat those, deer. So if you find a nice big cache of nuts that a red squirrel has placed, you could target that and you could potentially get quite a lot of activity there. And then carnivores will sometimes cache their food. So I don't live in mountain lion country, but I know people who do, and they find, the deer that mountain lion kill, they eat part of it, and then they cover it up with debris. And the cat will visit repeatedly, and other animals come and try to steal it. So those are examples of what I mean.
Okay.
Latrines are good sites for certain animals. That's where an animal poops repeatedly. Some animals just drop their scat at random, or they might place it at trail junctions, depends on the species. Other animals have places that they go to repeatedly to poop. And those are great spots, obviously, because the animal's going to keep coming back. And they also are sometimes spots that attract different species who come and overmark, to put their own scent. So, for example, the bobcat latrine, where bobcat repeatedly drops its scat, might be overmarked by foxes or coyotes. An otter latrine is one of my favorites. That's an accumulation of otter scat. It's usually at a pond edge, often near a beaver dam. I mentioned before that they spend a lot of time near beaver dams. And the otters are very interesting and entertaining social creatures and you can get quite a lot of interesting activity if you just target their latrine. So those are examples of that. Let me think of what else. Just thinking about hunting behavior, the way I got wolves out in, where was this? Minnesota. I had minimal time to track out there, but I found a deer yard, tons of deer beds and lots of deer tracks and scat, really hot area for deer. And I just put a camera in the deer yard and got all these wolves coming through. Obviously, wolves hunt for deer, so they're going to be attracted to high concentrations of deer activity. That was much easier than like finding a wolf den or a wolf rendezvous. So I just put it where all their prey is. A way I got badgers is by targeting their favorite prey, which is burrowing mammals. So if you found, like a prairie dog town, a ground squirrel colony, a place with a lot of kangaroo rat activity, those are all small burrowing rodents. Those tend to be very, very attractive for animals like the badger, which dig up burrowing rodents. Yeah. So yeah, you just think about your animal. What do they eat? Where are they hunting? Where are they going? How are they using the landscape? And that's how you determine. And then learn how to recognize their tracks and scat and other sign.
So when you were learning this, do you have any guides that you like to use, to learn your tracks or scat?
Yeah. So let's see. I got three favorites here, for tracking now. So my favorite for the Eastern U.S. was Paul Resendez's book. It was published in the 90s. It's called Tracking in the Art of Seeing. I have it right here. This was a great one. It's a classic. It's a little, some of it's a little bit outdated, but it's still extremely useful and it's very, very readable. And then I hope I have the one I like for the West. I don't have that one handy. I think it's called The Tracker's Field Guide by James Lowry. And both of these books, Paul Resendez's and James Lowry's books, are supposed to cover the whole U.S., but the fact is that Resendez was from the East, so his covers the East more thoroughly, and Lowry was from the West, and his covers the West more thoroughly. And then for the real fanatics who really get into tracking and want to learn the details, this is the Bible. It's
hold it a little closer to you.
Yeah, can you bring it a little closer to this?
No, her. Hold it closer to herself, because
Oh, me?
yeah, there you go.
Okay. You see that?
Oh, down a little
Mark
bit.
Albrock.
Down a little bit.
Down a little bit.
But
Mammal
you're-
Tracking Sign by Mark Albrock. Yeah, this is the Bible. And it's a real thick tome. It's not something that anybody would read cover to cover, particularly not a beginner. But if you already have a working knowledge of track and sign of North American mammals, then this is like an encyclopedia that you can look up specific things in. That's what. Um, so none of these are geared specifically for camera trapping. So they don't necessarily focus on the kind of spots which make the best places for a camera, which is actually why I wrote my book. But you'll get a long way just learning basic tracking. It'll take you a very long way into improving your camera trapping skills.
No, that's cool. There's definitely a bunch of copies that I think our listeners are going to kick out of, and hopefully they'll pick up a few. And because I think that's a lot of this is it's, I don't know, I find it interesting. I've been doing the wildlife tracking since I think Dad started taking me out when I was like 3 or something. So I've been doing it a long time.
Oh, that's so cool.
And
like a second language for you.
Yeah, you just kind of look over and just. It's kind of it can get fun at parties, but so going on from there, so let's dive into what Cody was talking about earlier. Maybe like how about actually setting up the camera itself, like trying to like get your aim down, and do you have any particular tips or tricks on how you like to set up your cameras?
Yeah. So first of all, when you mount the camera, you want to mount it on something that is not going to sway at all in the wind. So a thin tree, for example, is not a good choice. If you can move the tree at all, it will sway in big wind, and that's going to create relative motion. And during the daytime, so actually we didn't really talk about how trail camera sensors work. But we should, because that'll talk a lot about them. That will help people understand the problem with moving vegetation. So these cameras, we call them motion sensitive. It's a little bit misleading, the name. What they're detecting is a temperature difference between the subject and the background. So like a warm-blooded animal comes into the scene, it's warmer than the background. The camera detects it and takes a photo. Generally, it sounds like it shouldn't be able to detect vegetation, and at night it generally doesn't, because the vegetation is the same temperature as the background. But on sunny days, the leaves and such can absorb some energy from the sun, such that it's a little bit warmer than the environment around it. And when the wind blows that warmed vegetation, it can make the camera trigger incessantly. So if the vegetation is stationary, but the camera is moving, that can also make a trigger. Any relative motion between bodies of different temperatures is going to make that camera trigger. So you want your camera to be as still as possible. You don't want it on anything that's going to sway in the wind. And you're going to need to either put it in a spot where there's no vegetation, or no waving around vegetation between the camera and your target spot, or you're going to have to clear that stuff. You might need to trim grass, or trim a couple branches, or whatever. And you also want to think about, well, what season am I in? Is this going to just all grow back in 2 weeks? And when am I going to come back and check the camera? Because I've made that mistake before. I placed a camera out. I was trying to get moose in northern Maine, and I was there in early spring, and it was still covered with snow, so I didn't know what the vegetation was going to look like around there. And I had my camera perfectly positioned and got beautiful moose photos for a while, but as soon as the snow melted and the vegetation grew up, it all engulfed my camera and made the camera take 30,000 photos of just waving vegetation in like 24 hours. And the batteries were dead and the card was full. So yeah, that was because I couldn't come back to that spot for months. But so if you're able to check the camera very frequently, then maybe you don't care so much about having to trim the vegetation. But if you're going to leave it for months, you don't want to leave it in a place where a lot of stuff is going to grow up within a few weeks.
Right. And then so clearing out, do you ever place your camera up high to try to get above the vegetation? Like I mean, way up?
You
Up
can,
high?
I don't, because those just create ugly pictures. If you're interested in presence absence data, then that might be the thing for you. But if you want nice photos are more like at the animal's eye level,
Yeah.
So of course that's another point in setting up the camera. You want to think about what's your target species and how high do you want it. It's going to be really different if you're after moose versus if you're after otters down low at the ground.
Yeah.
So you want to know, and at the airport, I don't know what are you most interested in, deer and coyote or something? Is that the?
Yeah, it can really vary. I mean, if you're finding a moose in the airport, you probably don't need a trail camera to go find them. But yeah, a lot of deer, coyotes. But you can get some smaller stuff. You might get otter passing through, mink. But generally, most of your stuff is going to be between fox and deer in size.
I see. Yeah. So that's pretty easy. So then, yeah. So you set the height accordingly. So just think about the height of the animal that you're interested in.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and
that
then
kind of goes into general photography, getting the eye. The eye
right,
is kind of key.
right. But yeah, I guess for your purposes, you could set it up really high, looking down, and that would be fine. Yeah.
Well, I was kind of wondering for maybe like some of our viewers, or listeners, maybe putting it up high on like a chain link fence or something, kind of trying to get it like almost like a security camera, like bearing down, trying to get something going past. Or
Right. So that might minimize the vegetation issues. It probably makes it less visible to people too, so less vulnerable to theft and vandalism. Yeah, a lot of people do it for that reason. I have seen people do that, put them really up high, looking down. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen folks like just out like hiking around in the woods. You'll see hunters. They'll put them out, and they'll have one down low, but then they'll have like a thief cam looking down on it, kind of thing. They'll have a cheaper one looking down on the better camera, just in case something happens.
Yeah, yeah.
And I gotta admit, I just had a little brain spasm for a second there.
So I got a question about placement.
Yeah.
Kind of angling wise. I've had issues with sun exposure.
Yeah.
And then so that's one question. And the other question is how to avoid that. And then the other question is it better to get have your camera set up so if it's a trail that the animal's coming to it, like coming head on to the camera, or profile?
Yeah. Okay, so let's do both of those. So the light one is easy. So just think about, well, first of all, if you face your camera into the sun, the setting and rising sun could make it trigger incessantly, which you don't want. And the other thing is just think about when you take a normal photo, what lighting do you want on the animal? Do you want the light all behind the animal, or do you want it all, the light coming from behind you and illuminating the animal? And it's the latter that you want, right? So that's how you set your cameras up to make that most likely, which means generally pointing that roughly to the north if it's possible. That's only one consideration, and in a forested setting where there's a lot of shade, that might not matter so much, but in an open area, you probably want to be more mindful of facing it to the north. Yeah. And the other thing is in terms of the trail, so it's generally not a good idea to face your camera directly down the trail for a couple of reasons. One is in terms of aesthetics, the shots of an animal head on are just not as appealing as one that's a little bit off to the side. And the other is because of the way the sensors work in these cameras, they're not very good at detecting animals coming directly at it. They have these, they all, I think all their sensors work a little bit differently, but generally they have different zones, and animals have to cross through more than one zone within that detection field in order to be detected. And if it's just coming directly at the camera, it might not pass through more than one zone. So it's better if you pull your camera off to the side a little bit and angle it in, and that also gives you an aesthetically appealing photo too. You could face it perpendicularly into the towards the trail. It might be a little bit less appealing aesthetically, and also if it's kind of hard to explain without a visual aid, but because of the geometry of the detection zone, an animal won't be in the detection zone for as long a time if you have it perpendicular. I'd have to show you with a little triangle to do that. If you can just pull it up the side and angle it in, the animal is in the detection zone for longer, and it passes through in such a way that it's very likely to be noticed by the sensor. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I'm just kind of thinking like some of the shots that I've taken, like get those perpendiculars. If you have a camera that's on the slower side, like you only got like for your trigger delay, as you mentioned, is a second. I mean that's. And if it's too close, if we're like a 1 second camera with only a 50-foot range, I mean 50 feet's not a long ways. It's less than 20 yards.
Yeah.
And if he comes in at like 15 yards, like maybe 10 yards, he's gonna clear that before
he could be gone. Yeah. Yeah. By the time it triggers. Yeah. These days, most of the cameras are fast enough to not have that problem, but yeah, it's generally that's a risk, I guess.
Yeah, you can say, instead of on a deer, for instance, you might, instead of getting the head, you're gonna get the white tail.
Yeah, you get a lot of tails that way. Yeah.
As he's going the other way. I mean, presence absence, it's a white-tailed deer, but
yeah, that's right. So maybe that doesn't matter. But if you want nicer, yeah.
It'd be kind of nice, to figure out maybe the gender. You're looking for, 1 buck and 3 does, or it's a 10 does out there.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about this. Because remember you're talking about the sun angle. I remember that was one we used to fight with all the time. If you had your camera on a northern tree, facing south, especially in the wintertime, get that low southern sun, and it just bakes that. It just one shot after another, you just get those flares.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're into the aesthetics of it, though, sometimes those create some beautiful shots, with the sort of...
get some cool lens flare going.
Oh, yeah, it depends on what you want out of your camera, I guess.
I had one in here, this trick that we used to use just for angles. So one trick that we used to do all the time is, having broken sticks in our pockets.
Yeah, we do that too.
Yeah, just so, sometimes, you'll come up and you got a leaning tree, you put your camera on there, your camera's going to be going down, so you can take a stick, and stick it across the back like that, and it kind of flushes that up.
Yep.
It makes it, just so maybe viewers at home that don't know what we're talking about, if they listen to the podcast, they're not going to figure out what I'm doing with my hands, but go to YouTube, folks.
Basically, what he's saying is just you can shove things like sticks, which are widely.
Yeah, you're basically shimming it for the most part.
You can shove it behind the camera in a way that you make the camera tilt exactly how you want it. That's what you can do. They also make these brackets that you can screw into a tree, and they let you kind of angle the camera exactly how you want. So that's a possibility. I hate carrying those around though; they're heavy.
Right.
And you want to, but whatever way you use to target the camera, you just want to, before you walk away from it, you want to make sure that it's correct. You want to make sure that what you want to be centered in the field of view actually is centered. And if your camera has a viewing screen, that's helpful. What I actually do, I don't use the viewing screen for that really very much because the screens are little, and depending on the lighting, it's hard to see. And sometimes if I'm after a short animal, my camera's so low to the ground that I have to lay down to look at the screen. So I carry you can use a cell phone camera or some other digital camera, and just put it right in front of the trail camera lens and take a photo, and then then you can just pick up your digital camera and look on its nice viewing screen and see what's centered, and then adjust it accordingly. So that's what I do. I generally take great pains to to position it exactly how I want to, because it's a big waste of time if I come back months later and find out, I wasn't even focused on the right thing. So
something so simple. I've never thought of that.
Yeah,
Always have the camera or the cell phone in my pocket anyway. So
yeah.
Right. So where do we go from here? So just maybe go to the next step. We've gotten the photos, we've camera set up, and we're going in. let's go see what we got kind of thing.
Jesse, I got one more thing.
Yep.
Positioning before we move on. Sorry about that.
No.
We talked about having it on trails and different points of interest. What about setting up, making them come to the camera, like and stuff like that? Like baiting, putting out some type of bait to draw them?
That's a whole big topic. Baits and lures.
Something that's specific that'll draw them to a specific spot. Okay, so you have a trail coming down, putting a feather here or something like that to get them to interact.
Like an attractant more than a lure.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't use lures and baits too often because what I'm usually interested in is the animal's natural behavior without me doing that. I want to see where it goes and what it does without me, with me influencing that as little as possible. But that said, I have done that on occasion. And so just for your listeners, a lure is an attractant that's not edible. And a bait is an edible. It's just food, an edible attractant. So if you're going to use a bait, you need to know what your target animal eats. And if you're going to use a lure, so a lure can be, the most common one is like a scent lure, but there are also visual lures, like you were saying, a feather. And there are even sound lures. I once used this little device that made the sound of a rabbit in distress and to get a bobcat to come in, and it worked. But I felt bad about it because then there's nothing there for the cat to eat. So I actually don't like using those things too often because it's a waste of energy for the animals to come to these lures. But that said, there are times when you want to do it. And just so people understand, you still need to, if you're going to use a lure, you still need to be able to figure out on your own where the animal is likely to go. Okay, you're not going to put, I'm not going to be able to put a scent lure for a Canada lynx down in Massachusetts and expect it to come from northern Maine, right? The situation where I use lures is, say, one example was I wanted to get a really nice shot with my DSLR camera trap of a weasel. And so I found a weasel latrine on top of a log. And so I knew that the weasel goes there, right? There's all these little weasel scats on there. But weasels move so quickly, I wanted something to make it just pause in front of the camera for like 2 seconds so I could get a decent photo. And so I put a little dab of a lure. I think I used something that's marketed as a Martin lure. And it worked. The weasel came and sniffed it for a few seconds. I got my photo, and that was it. I never went back there again. I took my camera out. Just again for your listeners, maybe not important so much in airport wildlife biology, but just in general, repeated use of scents and lures near where there's other people can create a lot of human-wildlife conflict. So if you're drawing predators in, for example, into your backyard so you can get nice pictures, but your neighbor has free-ranging chickens, that's going to be a disaster. And usually what loses in that case is the wildlife. They're going to want to get rid of that animal. So that's the cost of the nice photos that you got. So I just put that in for people because I just think you should think carefully about using those things in some settings. But a single use or just a couple of times in a certain area to get your photo or to see whatever behavior or document presence or whatever, that's fine. I don't know. I mean, I could talk. What do we want to know any more? Do we want to talk any more about scents and lures, or is that enough?
Yeah.
So, are you good, Cody?
Yeah. No, I did that on one mainly to get the animals to slow down on a project that we were working on, and I put it just some. It was more of a gland lure, and it was fascinating the interactions that the animals were having with that, rolling in it, struggling in it, defecating, everything you could think of. It was this new smell that they had never smelled before in the area, and it did cause them to definitely react to it and probably slow down a little bit for the camera as well. That's kind of because it was in a spot that I knew coyotes traveled, and but I wasn't really getting it. It would be a picture here and there, but mostly blanks, but it basically slowed them down.
Right. Yep.
But it was already a spot that they were coming through. I knew they were coming through there. I had tracks, and the layout of the land was conducive to that. So
Yeah. Yeah, because the only experience I have using that on a trail camera is the Fisher project I already cited before. We would receive beaver carcasses from local trappers, donated carcasses, and then we would use parts of those wrapped in chicken wire and strap them to a tree, with a little bit of it was another scent lure. I forget what it was actually called. Gusto. It was Gusto brand scent lure, and then we'd use that to attract and hold fisher in one area, and they would kind of come out and try to eat some. They'd eat some of the beaver meat, and then they'd move on. But we had downsides to that because we never had a bear come in, even though we were in bear country, but we worked in the wintertime, mostly when they were hibernating.
Right.
I think we only worked like 2 weeks into after the first bear was confirmed out of its den that year. But we used to have issues with raccoons, especially when it got warm out and the boars, the male raccoons started coming out. They come out earlier in the year for breeding, and they would just destroy those bait sets. They didn't touch the camera, but when we would have gun cleaning, like brass gun cleaning brushes or copper brushes, to collect hair samples from the fisher, and they'll come through and just choked with big mats of gray hair. Those in the whole you'd find chicken wire for 10 yards, that was shredded. So you can definitely attract some animals that way, but
yeah. So actually, that's another good point of what you said is that it's not always the animal that you're after that your target animal that comes to the baits and lures tend to attract a lot of different animals.
Yeah.
So it could be good for general captures, but it's not necessarily going to get the animal that you put it out for.
No, for sure. And then, you can think about the weasels you were talking about. I got a photo somewhere. Well, the state does. New York State does. It was a picture of an ermine sticking his head out right below sticking out of the snow. It was like 2.5 feet of snow on the ground that day.
Yeah.
But sticking his head out of the snow right at the base of the tree.
Yeah.
And then it has a timestamp. And then 2 minutes later, you can see myself and my partner walking in the frame. So he was right there. He was under our feet the entire time. But until we had that camera, we didn't know he was there.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah,
that was a cool photo.
That's very cool. Weasels can be tough to get because they're so fast. They're there and gone before the camera sees them.
Yeah, I think we got lucky. I think we had 5 weasels on camera that year, between longs and short tails. But everything else pretty cool. But so just because we're well past the 1 hour mark, so I don't want to go back to, we've gotten our photos. Our camera has our photos. When you go in to check your cameras, do you what's your process? Do you yank the card, swap one out, and walk out, or do you carry a photo checking device with you, or?
Actually, so I mentioned before that I only buy cameras now that have viewing screens that allow me to watch videos and to review the photos right on the camera. And I also take a digital camera with me that I can just, if it's only, so I cannot view the videos on my digital camera, but I can view the photos, and it allows me, my digital camera allows me to go through them much more rapidly. So if it's photos, I put it in my digital camera and I just rapidly go through them in the field. Maybe not all of them, if there's 15,000, but I want to get a sense. I do check in the field if at all possible, because I want to get a sense of, is this a good spot? Should I keep the camera here, or should I move it? Or should I point it? Maybe keep it here, but point it a little bit different way or something like that. So yeah, I always check in the field to inform what I'm going to do next. But I also take that card home and download it on the computer so I can look at it on a bigger screen in case I miss stuff. So in the field, I just do a very quick check, although my husband would say it's very slow. It can last forever. He gets frustrated. But
So
yeah.
I'm curious, have you ever messed with those little SD card readers that plug into your mobile devices?
I haven't done that. No, I haven't done that. But yeah, I know they exist, but I haven't used those.
Have you ever played with those, Cody?
I've had a couple models. I've gotten them cheap off of Amazon, and the interface with the phone is not the best.
Oh, really?
Maybe because I've models, but I'd have it start downloading the pictures. And the way the iPhone, maybe it's because of the iPhone too, but the way the iPhone, in order to see any quality of the pictures, you have to download them onto the phone. You can't like view pictures remotely. You can, but they're like a thumbnail and they're not really. And then when I transfer over, I'd lose connection quite often. That could be just my issue, but I've tried 2 viewers that way, and I've had that issue. I've never tried like a dedicated viewer though, like one where the whole thing's your viewer, where you take it into the woods. So I'm sorry about that. I'm under the camp for swapping them out, but I have taken my digital camera with me and viewed them that way too, and that works pretty well. It's got a better quality screen and such. So I guess I've done a little bit of both, just not the dedicated version.
Yeah, because I always swap them out. I've always just swapped. I always carry like a little that's over my camera bag. I carry all my stuff is in my my DSLR bag over there, but I always carry a little SD card wallet, like a little. I think it's a Pelican brand.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for carrying cars. But I used to have it. Actually, I broke it. I snapped a little part where it goes into your phone off. But I used to carry one of the SD card adapters, just went into your battery port in your cell phone, in my iPhone. And I had some issues with it, but I always kind of liked it because I could just plug it in, look at them, and I could go back to my truck. I'd have it just sitting in a cup holder in my truck. I'd reach over, plop it in the phone, go through, check all my cards. Because I was running a 5 camera line at the time. I have them kind of spaced around my property back in New York. And they were always kind of. I always enjoyed the process, but I didn't know that some folks were having. I didn't know you were having issues with them.
You must need cell phone coverage in an area. See, I never.
See, mine just opened with an app. It was all offline. You just had like a special app or something, and it went through there. Then you hit a button, you could save it right to your camera roll, just like you're taking a photo with your iPhone or with your phone.
You guys are probably much more phone literate than me. I'm still an older generation. But yeah, but a lot of these cameras now have pretty good viewing screens, and you can watch the videos on them. So it's actually fairly easy to just look at it in the camera, and if you want to do that, I don't know, and then decide. I would never just take it home, like not look at anything in the field and take it home. Just replace the card, because then you don't know until you get home whether that camera needs to be moved.
Right. Well,
you want to check your batteries when you check your camera, and about so they usually the viewing screen has like a little, what do you call it, a little battery meter to tell you about how much is left. What's that?
You're breaking up wicked, Cody.
Yeah, I can't hear your. All right. Well, anyway, I can't hear Cody right now, so I'll just keep talking. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right. So it has a little battery meter on it, and the thing to know is that once it says around that only like 90% of the batteries left, it sounds like a lot, but they tend to die really quickly at that point. The decay curve for battery charge goes very gradually, at first very slowly, and then there's a steep decline. So if you're going to be checking your cameras every week, maybe it's okay to leave it until it's almost dead. But if you're going to be checking them every few months, what I do is as soon as it says 90%, I replace those batteries. And then I save those. I don't just throw those out. I save those partially used batteries to like use for other devices or to use for cameras either in my yard or close to my yard where I can check it frequently. But something that I'm not going to get to for months, I want to make sure there are batteries in there that are going to last a long time. So just be aware of that battery decay curve. It's very gradual at first, but it only needs to go to about 90% before it starts to steeply decaying.
Yeah, because just going off, I learned through the protocols, the state protocols, and ours was 75. as soon as it hit 75%, you know, we do the same thing. You know, you'd save them. You know, we'd have a separate box. I mean, but it had like 100 something batteries in there.
Yeah.
Just from ones that we ripped out of cameras. It still had 75% on, you know, at least when it was in the card, but you know, we were running in temperatures of negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit,
Yeah.
and you know, after 75, they just tank.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm in a cold climate too. You could probably get away with using them for longer if you're in a warmer climate, but here in the winter they drain more quickly. So I wouldn't leave them in. But saw it saying 75. Yeah.
Yeah. I think 75. I think that's a in cold climate. I think in the warmer climate, you probably let them get down to like 50, 40, something like that. But especially, you know, in an airport environment, um, you know, you're going to have access to them a little bit easier. You know, you can check them every week if you have to, or
Yeah.
I think the longest that one will ever be allowed to soak without being checked is about a month probably.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, a
So
month's going to be a
yeah,
long time. Most of them are going to be weekly or bi-weekly.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't usually wind up with a long soak. And then so we were talking about uh, just kind of going back. Just want to make sure we're covering all our bases. We did talk about setting. You talked about setting on trees. Um, have you ever dealt with any of the devices for setting them out in the open? I know they have some that have little stands, or you can like
Yes.
set them out in the field.
So other types of sets, yeah, I've used many different things. I don't like to carry around stuff when I'm going out because sometimes I have to hike pretty far to
Yeah.
wherever my camera sites are. So what we meaning my husband and I, we do this a lot of this together. We try to make use of whatever we can find on site. So we have built like tripods out of sticks that we find, and sort of like use rocks that we find to kind of stabilize the base. We, in certain environments, like in a rocky desert environment, we used to take, this was, I think, in Nevada, we used to take climbing, these little climbing things. They're called walnuts. I don't, if you're not a climber, you're probably not, I'm not a climber
I'm
either.
not familiar with those.
But people use them to like stick them into the cracks in the rock, and then I guess they tie their climbing ropes to them and use them to get up the rock. But the point is though is that they sort of clamp into the cracks in rocks. So we have actually used those to mount cameras directly to the rocks. So whatever, yeah, there are, depending on the kind of environment you're in. Oh, and we've also made our own posts. I found that the posts that you buy um, are just too flimsy. So if we are going to carry, and say it's a really open environment, there won't be any sticks like in the desert or a prairie environment, and you're going to need a post. We make them, it'll be hard to just, again, without a visual aid to describe this, but what we found works really well is you get a long piece of rebar, maybe 2 feet long, and then a 2x4 piece of wood that's of whatever height you need. Generally, ours are never more than 2 feet high. We never need really high posts for what we do. And then you screw a hole up into the 2x4, and then you thread the rebar into it. Are you following?
Yeah, a little bit.
And
Yeah.
you can stick the rebar down into the ground, and you have a sturdy wooden post that you're going to mount your camera to, and the rebar can go deep down. And sometimes, to make it really stable, we put in 2 parallel rebars up into that post. So this is the wooden post, this is a 2x4, this is the rebar, it's going in like that, or 2 rebars like that. Can you guys? Yeah. And then you can put your camera on that. Now, that obviously someone could steal that, they could just pull it up, but remember, they would have to carry the whole contraption out, the rebar and the post and the camera that's screwed onto it, which is also in a security box, which would be very, very awkward. So it's generally a great deterrence, even though it's not 100% foolproof, nor is a cable lock. People can cut those. But it's enough of a deterrent that we've never had anything like that stolen in that type of environment. So there are many, many ways. Just use your imagination. You can improvise with rocks and sticks or whatever you find on site, or you can carry stuff in to the field. But generally, I found that the posts for sale The ones I've tried anyway are just too flimsy. They're not stable enough. The type of soil there is too, as to how stable
Right.
it's going to be.
I've had issues with the diameter of the post being
Yeah.
an issue, trying to get good support with that. And then just one thing, anti-theft device that Kristen actually used when she was doing her grass research. She was doing it outside of the fence.
We're losing you again,
Yeah,
Cody.
I can't hear much.
Your book?
Oh, sure, I'd love to.
Yeah.
Are we recording right now, or are we just?
Yeah. No, I haven't stopped. So yeah, I'll edit this in.
All right. So basically, it's a species by species account. It covers about 40 species, and I go through the tracks and sign of all the different animals with an emphasis on where the animal appears repeatedly in the landscape, because that's what's important for a camera trapper. You want to be able to put your camera out and know that the animal's going to come back. So it's one thing, for example, to be able to identify a bear scat, but a bear scat isn't a good thing to target for a trail camera with a trail camera in order to get bear, because they don't return to that same space. You know what I mean? But
Right.
Another animal that creates latrines, like a gray fox or an otter or a raccoon, they do come back to those spots. So it makes a good camera target. So it's track and sign and animal behavior, but specifically geared towards camera placement. It's a book you can use if you want to, say, study bobcats, and you want to figure out where are good places to put the camera to get bobcat, or to observe interesting bobcat behavior. That's the point of it. Yeah. So
Okay. And where can people pick up this book?
Amazon is probably the easiest place. It might be in some bookstores, but you can get it on Amazon. So
All right, and then one more time, can you say the title again?
I will even show it to you. It's Camera Trapping Guide. Here it is in front of my face. Track, sign, and behavior of eastern wildlife.
And then so that one's out now, and then we'll call it post pandemic.
Post-pandemic, I'd like to do the same thing for western wildlife. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in western wildlife, like, what kind of species are you going to be, kind of focusing on?
There'll be some overlap, but there are a lot of species out there that we don't have out here. So you have kangaroo rats, you have pronghorn, you have wolves. I covered wolves in the east, but it'll be more thorough in the west. You have cougars. I covered the Florida panther, but that's a very specific case of the same species. It's really different information for the west. Elk, I did cover elk for Wisconsin, but again, it'll be a little bit different for the West. What other things? So coatis, I did coatis. We don't have them in the East. What else is specific? Ringtails we don't have in the East. There are different kinds of rabbits. The deer are different. You have the black-tailed and mule deer out there. Bighorn sheep and mountain goats and grizzlies. We don't have those in the East. So there'll be some overlap because some of the species are in common, but there are going to be a lot of species that are specific to the West that we don't have here. So.
Right, because I'm hearing very very specialized, like coati. Like that's one that I think a lot of folks didn't realize we have in North America, let alone in the U.S.
Right. Yeah, it's mostly just in Arizona, maybe a little bit in a couple of other states too. But yeah, so we went down to Southeast Arizona and did a lot of tracking and camera trapping down there.
Yeah. Based out of Tucson kind of area.
Yeah, this actually the mountain, what do you call them? The Sky Island mountains around there.
That's Sky Islands, yeah.
Yeah. And you have prairie dogs out there. There are a lot of species out west that we do not have east of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
I'm mostly done with the Southwest. What I need to still do is the Northwest and some of the prairie species. And once I get to travel again, I can finish it. But it's
right
for now. But
No,
it's
that is
free,
very
so
cool.
I should say though that a lot of people in the West have bought this Eastern guide, and because there's a lot of overlap, they still find it useful. But it doesn't have sort of like the iconic Western species that we don't have in the East. Put it that way.
Right. I mean, species like elk.
It does have elk. It's not a very thorough chapter because there's only a little bit of elk and little spots in the Eastern
Right.
U.S. But it doesn't have bighorn sheep at all, and it doesn't have coatis at all. Skunk species that you have there that we don't have here. So
Right. I mean, here in Arizona, we have what 4 different species of skunks.
yeah.
What is it? Spotted, striped,
Hognose.
hognose, and hooded.
Yeah, hooded. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just here in Arizona. Armadillos, we don't have any here, but Western species.
That's one species I left out. I should have in the East. I should have used that because they're in the Southeast, but I just didn't get around to it. And you can't do everything, so I didn't cover those. But they're really interesting.
Yeah, oh yeah, they're a cool little animal. So you've got a book. Do you happen to have a website maybe folks can go visit?
Yeah, I have a website. It's called Winterberry Wildlife. And it's where I have my blog. It's also where I advertise my my programs, my outdoor programs, and when I do presentations, my schedule's on there. Although it's again because of the pandemic, everything's on hold, so there's nothing current on there. But once I'm able to travel around again, I'll update that.
So one more time, you said winterberry, like the season and then berry.
No, it's all one word, like the plant winterberry. It's called Winterberry Wildlife.
Winterberry wildlife. Okay.
Yeah, if you just Google that, or if you just Google my name, it'll come up. Yeah.
Right. And then one other thing I want. No, sorry. Go ahead.
Say, for listeners, they might be interested. I run this really, really cool Facebook group. It's called Trail Camera Photos and Videos, and I run a very tight ship.
It's very tight. Trust me.
So what I was by that I mean it's not one of these groups where people get out of control and fight. I nip all that stuff in the bud. So it really stays on focus, and people post some really nice quality stuff from all over the country and even all over the world. So if you want to see a lot of interesting wildlife that people are getting on their cameras, and everybody, all kinds of people are involved, from scientists to hunters to backyard naturalists and anything in between. So it's really it's a great group. I love doing it, and I learn a lot myself by looking at what other people post.
I mean, it's really cool. I mean, that's how I found out about you is joining the Facebook group, and I know it's one of my favorites on Facebook, right? Just because it is, it's not everybody's just not button heads. That's what
they do. They get kicked out.
Yeah. So it's definitely keeps everybody in line, and it definitely makes me enjoy it that much more. So thinking about the photos themselves, do you happen to have maybe a photo that you're most proud of, or maybe had like an interesting story or something tied to it?
Probably my very favorite photo is the one that I've had as the header for that group for a long time. It's a picture of a badger in Nevada sagebrush with the mountains in the background. And the reason that's my favorite is that sometimes you have a vision for how you want a photo to be. It's like, oh, if the animal just did that, the background would be the most beautiful photo. And he did it. I couldn't believe it. He came in and he's was positioned himself right where I wanted him, and it just worked out beautifully. So I targeted a badger den in the sagebrush, and I think it was an old one, so it wasn't clear that the badger was still there. But they do sometimes revisit their old dens, and I positioned the camera so it had that beautiful mountain backdrop, and the animal came and just posed. He just stood there and posed, looking right in the camera. It came out perfectly. That's probably my favorite.
That's cool. So I mean, folks can obviously go to Facebook to see that photo, but would you mind maybe if you can like send me a copy of that? I can put it over here, and then maybe folks can see that photo when they watch the YouTube.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
No, as long as you don't mind. I mean, folks. I mean, hopefully, folks will be going to the Facebook group and checking it out too. But
how do I find you on YouTube? I searched your name, and I didn't think I came up with.
It's just Airport Wild.
Oh, it's under that. Okay, it's on Airport Wild.
My name is a different personal channel.
All right, Airport Wild. And so, how is this going to be like a video on on YouTube, and then
Yeah. So we'll have the video component. Yep, exactly. We'll have the video component of this on YouTube, and then the audio.
Okay.
I'll rip the video part away, and I'll keep the audio, and then that'll go on as a standard podcast.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. I can send that to you.
Yeah, so just hopefully, folks, if they're listening to this on podcasts, this just means they gotta go to YouTube and to see the photo. They'll drive our views up on YouTube.
I see. Okay.
So we got Cody back.
Yeah, I'm phone battery guy.
Oh yeah, that'll do it.
So it was getting slow. My processor on the phone must have been slowing down, so messing up. But Jan, I really want to thank you for coming on today. It was very informative. I do have one question, and so I have my mother-in-law is a trail cam nut, and I think she would love your book, and I would like to know if you could, if I bought the book directly from you instead of Amazon, if I could have you sign it to her.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
you have them in stock?
I do have
there.
a few here. Yeah. Yeah, I can do
Put me
that.
on
If
the
you
spot.
like,
Sorry.
message me where to send it to and what her name is, and yeah, I can do that.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. She's going to be thrilled listening to this podcast, and then
Cool.
Oh, this is right up her alley.
yeah. She works with the company too, so she's our basically she's the bookkeeper for the company. So I've learned a lot. She usually actually does all of our trail camera purchasing because she knows more about it than frankly I do. So I have been using them a long time, but I haven't really taken the time to become an expert in how they operate and stuff. I pretty much just put them down and watch the basics of it. So my first one go back to probably 95 or 96. I bought my first one, saved up. It probably cost me $500, and it was actually 2 units. It was the I think it was the Trail Timer was the name of it, and it had 1 unit, and then it had a wire that would connect to this other sandwich looking thing, and you would put an actual camera in there, and it would have a button on top, and it would actually push down to take the picture. So
wow.
I've loved using them since then. So, but thank you so much for coming and sharing.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me. It was good. It was fun. All right.
All right, so I guess we'll use that one as the ending instead. But no, I mean I'm still recording. It'll end when we hang up anyways. But no, I mean thank you. I mean can't really say enough. Thanks for agreeing to do this and coming on. And I know I wouldn't lie. I didn't know about the heat portion of I thought it was just straight motion sensor. Then you talk about the different heat and the plants and that's one issue I've had a lot in when I was back east. When I lived back east was we get plant growth from a camera. It start waving back and forth and you just got picture after picture after picture of nothing.
Yeah, right.
But,
yeah, cool.
No, I'm just glad that Cody was able to jump on as well. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure if you were going to be able to make it or not today.
Never know where I'm going to be. I'm actually in Rhode Island right now. So.
Oh, okay.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah. Thanks again, and yeah, maybe we can do this again sometime.
All right. Cool. Thanks.
Bye.
All right. Should I hang up now, or are we?
Yeah. Just hang up. It'll all close.
Okay.
All right.